My father mocked me. A soldier isn't supposed to sing. He forced me to perform at the Veterans Gala, as a joke. I sang just one verse, and the entire room of generals fell silent. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs turned to my father, eyes wide. "Sir, that song is the forbidden anthem of Ghost Team 7. I grew up inside the echo of my father's medals. They clinked whenever he moved, small metallic ghosts that filled our house with discipline, silence, and judgment. He was Colonel Richard Hale, hero of 3 peacekeeping missions, guest of honor in more military dinners than I could count. I was the son who never followed in his footsteps. While he trained cadets to march in perfect symmetry, I learned harmony in music halls, not barracks. He called it weakness. "Music doesn't defend nations, Michael," he used to say, polishing his service revolver like punctuation. "Men do." For him, emotion was a leak in the armor. For me, it was the only way to breathe. We lived in the same house, but in different climates. He thrived on control, I survived on avoidance. Every conversation felt like a debriefing, short, cold, designed to find fault. I remember the last time I tried to share something personal. I'd just composed a choral piece that won a regional award. He said, "Nice, but what's the point of teaching people to sing if you can't even make them follow orders?" I learned not to argue. I learned to shrink. So when his assistant called last month, inviting me to the annual Veterans Gala, I hesitated. Apparently, my father had insisted I attend. "He says it's time people heard your talent," she said, quoting him like a line from a report. Something in her tone told me it wasn't a compliment. Still, part of me wanted to go. Maybe it was masochism, maybe a final attempt at reconciliation. Maybe I just wanted him to look at me the way he looked at his soldiers, with a trace of respect. The gala was held at the Henderson Hall, a former NATO base turned luxury hotel by the coast. Every year, high-ranking officers, politicians, and foreign attaches gathered there, a parade of decorated ghosts, as my mother once called them. When I arrived, the air smelled of perfume, whiskey, and nostalgia. The chandeliers reflected medals and wrinkles equally. My father stood near the stage, immaculate in uniform though he'd retired 5 years ago. His posture was a weapon, upright, unyielding. When he saw me, his mouth curved into that diplomatic half-smile reserved for cameras and enemies. "Michael," he said, shaking my hand instead of hugging me. "You look civilian." That was his way of saying disappointing. During dinner, I noticed the pattern. Every introduction of me came with a punchline. "This is my son, the artist. Don't salute, he might compose about it." Laughter followed, polite and sharp. I smiled, pretending it didn't cut. At dessert, he raised his glass and said, "Since my son is here, and he's musically inclined, perhaps he'll give us a song?" The crowd clapped, expecting entertainment. I froze. It wasn't a request, it was a test, dressed as a toast. He gestured to the small stage. "Come on, son. Show these men what passion sounds like." He knew I couldn't refuse without confirming his narrative. The weak, sensitive son who never belonged. So I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked toward the microphone. I didn't yet know that the song I was about to choose would expose a secret buried for decades, or that it would end the legend of Colonel Richard Hale forever. The days leading up to the gala felt strangely heavy, like the week before an execution. I tried not to think about it, but the invitation card sat on my desk like a silent dare. Henderson Hall, Saturday, 1900 hours. Even the font looked military, bold, aligned, emotionless. I hadn't sung in public for over a year. After my divorce, I stopped performing, teaching instead. Kids were easier than audiences. They didn't judge the tremor in my hands or the cracks in my tone. But now, I'd have to stand before a room full of generals, all of them looking for weakness the way hunters look for tracks. My father's assistant, Nora, called again the night before. "He wants to make sure you're bringing your guitar," she said. "My what?" "He said you used to play something from your grandfather's notes." I paused. "Did he say notes?" "Yes. He mentioned some old melody you were obsessed with as a teenager." That stopped me cold. She was talking about that melody, the one I found years ago in my grandfather's storage chest, hidden behind a false panel. A worn notebook filled with strange notations and lyrics half burned by time. I had turned it into a song when I was 17, rearranging it by instinct. My father found out, screamed at me for touching things I didn't understand, and ordered me never to play it again. "Those aren't songs," he said. "They're mistakes that should stay buried." And yet, here he was, insisting I bring it. It didn't make sense. Unless, it wasn't really about music. Maybe he wanted to humiliate me with something sentimental. Maybe he thought I'd crumble if I revisited the past he'd forbidden. I almost didn't go. I stood in my apartment, staring at the clock, telling myself I owed him nothing. But guilt is a powerful leash. At 1800 hours, I found myself driving toward Henderson Hall anyway, the guitar case on the back seat like a passenger that knew too much. The hall was blinding with chandeliers and brass. A string quartet played softly near the entrance, young musicians in black, like hired shadows. Everywhere I looked, there were uniforms, medals, and wine glasses. Laughter, polished shoes, stories told too loudly. I recognized faces from old photographs. Men who had been at our house when I was a child, men who called my father sir even now. When he saw me arrive, he raised his glass slightly, as if ticking off a box on a checklist. Good, he said when I reached him. You're punctual for once. He turned to his colleagues. Gentlemen, my son decided to grace us with his civilian presence. They laughed. I smiled like an obedient soldier. Evening, Colonel, I said, the word tasting like ash. As the evening dragged on, I noticed the rhythm, speeches, toasts, jokes that had survived half a century. Behind every laugh was fatigue, behind every medal a ghost. But my father was in his element. He radiated command. For him, the gala wasn't nostalgia, it was a stage. At one point, I caught him whispering something to General Becker, the chairman of the Veterans Council. Both men looked in my direction. Becker smiled faintly, as if anticipating entertainment. When dessert arrived, my father struck his glass with a spoon, that crisp metallic sound that always meant attention. Gentlemen, he said, tonight we celebrate not only our past, but the legacy that continues through the next generation. He looked straight at me. My son has inherited a sense of rhythm, though perhaps not of duty. Laughter again. He has prepared a small musical piece, inspired by his grandfather's notes. Some of you might even remember the old man's taste in irony. The blood drained from my face. I hadn't prepared anything, and I knew, the moment he mentioned my grandfather, that this wasn't a coincidence. That melody, that notebook, those strange lyrics, they were not just old notes. They were connected to something darker, something he didn't want anyone to remember. I realized then, he wanted me to play it, not despite its meaning, but because of it. Maybe he thought no one would recognize it. Maybe he believed the years had buried the truth deep enough. But deep down, I suspected he was wrong. I walked toward the stage as applause began. The spotlight hit my face, bright, sterile, interrogative. The microphone crackled. My hands trembled slightly as I unlatched the guitar case. And in that frozen moment, I thought of my grandfather's handwriting, those scorched words under the title. Ghost Team 7, Field Hymn, 1973. Unauthorized. I tuned the guitar with the kind of care you give to a delicate lie. Fifth string, a touch flat. Corrected. A cough in the second row. Glassware chiming somewhere on the left. My father's smile, still there, still theatrical, said he expected a harmless lullaby to round out his joke. I leaned into the microphone. Good evening. My voice came out steady, a small victory. This is an old family piece. A couple of chuckles. One officer raised his phone to record. Someone at the back muttered, "Hope it's short." I didn't announce the title. There wasn't one that I could say without detonating something. I just placed my fingers at the first position and let the opening figure fall in 3 quiet notes, like a password whispered to a locked door. Low E open. G with a suspended fourth. Back to E. The hall shifted 1 degree colder. It's a simple melody if you only hear its skin. 3 phrases, each looping around a center note, then landing on a false resolve. But underneath, the rhythm carries a distinct, asymmetrical lilt, 7 beats braided into 8, then clipped. It marches without calling itself a march. It prays without admitting faith. I sang the first line softly, almost conversational. Night draws no borders on a map you carry home. No one laughed. Glass stems stopped moving. Somewhere near the front, a chair scraped the floor, then froze. I felt the muscle memory of being 17 again, hunched over my grandfather's notebook, trying to decipher his odd-bar lines and half-burned syllables. He'd notated the melody as if he were racing a clock, ink stuttering mid-measure like a breath held too long. Back then, I'd rearranged it for guitar because that's what I knew. I hadn't understood the weight. I just knew it felt like walking in darkness with a hand on your shoulder you couldn't see. Second line. We count the living by the names we cannot speak. I heard someone exhale hard, almost a curse. A man in a white dinner jacket put his napkin down like he'd suddenly lost his appetite. 10 tables back, an older veteran, silver hair, heavy brow, stared at my fingers, not my face, as if counting the pattern. My father's smile didn't move, but the corners of his eyes did. The grin had stopped being for the room. Now it was for me. An instruction. Keep it light. I didn't. I let the third phrase open wider, pushing the resonance. The chord turned from suspended to minor, then up a whole tone where it shouldn't. That modulation is the tell. It's the flare in a night sky, the part that says, we are where we aren't supposed to be. 30 seconds in, the chairman rose. The scraping of his chair sounded obscene in the silence. General Becker, broad-shouldered, medals stitched to memory, took one step forward and didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He leaned just enough toward my father and let the line escape like a verdict. That's the forbidden anthem of Ghost Team 7. Whispered, but the room heard it. Because the room remembered. A tremor ran through the tables like a short current. 2 men at the far end exchanged a look I recognized from funerals. That stiff, hollow recognition of a door reopening to a corridor you swore you'd sealed. A young attaché glanced at his phone, then quickly faced down, as if even screens weren't safe here. I kept playing. Not bravely, mechanically. If I stopped, I knew I'd never start again. I finished the verse and let the last note hang too long. A rookie mistake, or maybe a challenge. I can't say which. The note faded into ceiling chandeliers, an old carpet, and a single cough that nobody owned. Becker didn't sit. He addressed the air between us. Where did you learn that melody? His voice was flat, professional. It didn't ask, it audited. In my grandfather's notebook, I said. Years ago. Name. Thomas Hale. Something passed through the chairman's face, recognition, then restraint. He nodded once, almost to himself, cataloging me into a file that already existed. My father finally moved. He put his glass down carefully, as if loud noises could shatter the moment back into something manageable. General, he said, the polished host again. Some family traditions blur origins. My father-in-law was a hobbyist with unusual taste. Michael simply. Colonel. Becker didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With respect, there's no hobbyist origin for that cadence. He tapped the table twice, counting silently. 7, then 8, then clipped. Ghost Team 7 used to field him to coordinate off-book extractions and confirm friendlies in conditions where radio silence was mandatory. He let the words land. It was never to be performed outside theater. Ever. A murmur rolled, then died. Someone whispered, I thought they burned those sheets. Another, they did. A third voice, not all. My father tried to smile again, but this time the muscles fought him. Surely we're dramatizing an old camp song, he said. No one is accusing a family ditty of. It's not a camp song, Becker said, still looking at me, not him. It marks locations, times, confirmations. His eyes moved to my hands. Play the refrain. I swallowed. I don't know the original refrain. I only have what I reconstructed. He studied me for a second, reading posture and pulse like a report. Then play what you have. I should have refused. This is where, if I'd been wiser, I would have closed the case, apologized for the confusion, and sat down. But some part of me, pride, anger, the teenager with the notebook, refused to let my father convert this into another dinner anecdote. I nodded. I began the refrain I'd written at 17. It lifted the melody into a sharper minor and then drove it into a cadence that doesn't resolve, the musical equivalent of headlights cutting out mid-bridge. As soon as I hit the fourth bar, 3 men flinched. Not theatrically. Reflex. I stopped. Silence pressed on the room like a hand on a wound. Becker spoke quietly. That bar was ours. The rest you filled. He looked, finally, at my father. Colonel Hale, we need to talk. Not after dessert. Now. My father's jaw worked, then stilled. He stood, every inch of him back in uniform even without the rank. General, with respect, this is my son's performance. We can debrief another time. Becker's gaze didn't shift. This is the debrief. I realized, too late, that whatever I'd just sung was more than a melody. It was a key, and I had turned it. And because this is a confession, not a myth, I'll say what I should have said years ago. I knew there was danger in that notebook. I didn't know how much. I played anyway, because I wanted the truth to be louder than my father's laughter. That's on me. No one applauded. The silence had a weight I could feel through the soles of my shoes. The air itself had thickened, too dense to breathe, too sharp to move through. My father was still standing, half turned toward General Becker, his jaw locked in that military hinge of control. All around him, metals gleamed like open eyes that didn't dare blink. Becker gestured to two men in dark suits near the back. They weren't part of the dinner staff. They moved with the kind of still precision that makes crowds quiet themselves. One of them closed the double doors to the hall. The other stayed near the exit, not blocking it outright, just present. My hands were still on the guitar, but I couldn't feel the strings anymore. They might as well have been wires connected to a detonator. Becker said, "Colonel Hale, this melody was last logged under a classified directive in '73. It shouldn't exist. It was meant to die with the team that carried it." He turned slightly. "And yet your son knows every measure." "I told you," my father said too quickly. "Family folklore. You people see ghosts everywhere." His voice was steady, but his pupils betrayed him. Two small points darting between Becker and me, calculating exits. Becker didn't blink. Ghost Team 7 wasn't folklore. Then, almost to himself, "We buried 9 men in unmarked ground and left one missing. You know that, Colonel. You signed the paperwork." A murmur spread across the tables, the kind that sounds like wind but tastes like fear. Someone muttered, "I thought that was sealed." Another whispered, "The Geneva operation," and was shushed instantly. Becker's eyes returned to mine. "Mr. Hale, do you understand what you played?" "No," I said. It was in my grandfather's notebook. I thought it was a song." My father's voice cut in, "Exactly. An innocent melody, General. You're building conspiracies out of signatures I personally verified." Becker snapped, his calm cracking just once. He drew a folded document from his breast pocket, yellowed edges, the kind of paper that smells like locked drawers. "Operation Sable. Ghost Team 7. Lead Coordination Officer, Colonel Richard Hale." Gasps. The kind of sound people make when decorum finally collides with truth. My father didn't reach for the paper. He stared at it like it was a loaded weapon. "That file was destroyed," he said. "Apparently not." Becker laid it flat on the tablecloth, smoothing the creases with military precision. "You were listed MIA for 3 days. When you returned, your report omitted coordinates. That was how you confirmed extraction points. Every bar is a grid reference." He looked at me again. "Your grandfather wasn't composing music. He was encoding operations." I felt my throat close. My grandfather. Thomas Hale. He was a medic, wasn't he? Becker's silence was answer enough. "Finally, medics don't authorize kill extractions." He wasn't just patching wounds, son. He was cleaning them off the record. My father slammed a palm on the table, the sound ringing like a gunshot. "Enough. You will not dissect my family over a tavern tune." Becker stood as well, an old soldier meeting another across the battlefield of linen and crystal. "This isn't a tavern, Colonel." And that tune just confirmed what many of us suspected. Around the hall, no one moved. Even the servers had vanished. Every breath seemed to wait for the next word to decide whether to exist. My father's face hardened into something I'd never seen. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, calculation stripped of mask. He said quietly, "You have no proof beyond an old song and a boy who doesn't know what he's singing." Becker replied just as softly, "Then let's test that. Mr. Hale, the refrain, can you hum only the rhythm? No notes?" I hesitated. "Just the rhythm?" "Yes. Tap it, if you prefer." I set the guitar down and tapped the pattern on the microphone stand. 7 beats, then 8, then a pause. Becker nodded. "There. 7-8 pause. That was the signal for sight clear. Proceed to sweep." He turned to my father. "How many times did you order it, Colonel?" The colonel didn't answer. Becker continued, each word heavier than the last. "Those coordinates led to a civilian village. You filed it as an insurgent depot. We lost an entire platoon cleaning what wasn't there." The room froze again. Someone whispered, "Dear God." I felt sick. My father looked at me finally, eyes no longer sharp, but desperate. "Michael, stop this. You don't understand what they're implying." "I think I do," I said. My voice sounded older than I remembered. "Grandfather wrote the melody because you told him to." He shook his head, almost pleading. "You're twisting." Becker's tone turned final. "The board will reopen the file. Tonight, you'll remain on premises until the review team arrives. Two uniformed aides moved closer. Not hostile, just procedure. My father didn't resist. He straightened his tie, the way he used to before a parade. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I couldn't read whether the look was anger or apology. He said, almost gently, "You've no idea what you've done, son." And he was right, because I'd thought I'd sung a song. Instead, I'd resurrected a war. They cleared the hall like it was a quarantine zone. No shouting, no chaos, just a silent choreography of order. Uniforms escorted guests toward the exits with polite insistence, while a handful of officers remained, low voices circling around Becker like orbiting satellites. My father disappeared through a side corridor with two intelligence officers in plain suits. Someone told me to stay. Then another voice, official but not unkind, said, "This way, Mr. Hale." I followed them into a smaller annex, one of the old briefing rooms from the base's NATO days. No windows, just concrete walls painted beige, a table, two chairs, a jug of water. The smell of polish and dust. Becker entered a few minutes later, removing his jacket before sitting opposite me. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, the kind of fatigue that only truth brings. He poured water into two glasses, pushed one toward me. "Drink. It's going to be a long night." I didn't touch it. He studied me for a while, maybe trying to decide which version of me to speak to, the musician or the son. Finally, he said, "Do you know why that melody was forbidden?" I shook my head. "You said it encoded coordinates." "That's the surface. The melody was used during an operation that never officially happened. Ghost Team 7 was a cleanup unit, meaning they erased traces of things others shouldn't have done. Your grandfather was their signal officer. Your father was their field lead." He paused, measuring my reaction. The hymn was their way of confirming zones after what they called final clearance. But those clearances weren't always enemy sites. I felt something hollow open in my chest. "You mean civilians?" He didn't answer, and that silence was worse than words. I said, "Why hide it all these years?" Becker rubbed his temples. "Because nations prefer tidy archives. And because the men who carried it lived by codes, loyalty, secrecy, chain of command. Until one broke." "Who?" He looked at me in a way that felt almost merciful. "Your grandfather, Thomas Hale." I blinked. "That's impossible. He died when I was 5. "Yes. Not in service, though. He sent copies of the melody to an oversight committee, embedded in his compositions, trying to expose what had been done under the Ghost Team seal. Before the hearing date, he was found dead. Officially an accident." I stared at the table, tracing invisible lines in the wood. So the notebook I'd found as a teenager, the one my father called a mistake that should stay buried, was an attempted confession. And I had just broadcast it to an audience of the very men who buried it. Becker leaned forward. "You said your father told you never to play it again. Did he ever say why?" "He said some mistakes deserve silence." He nodded slowly. He wasn't wrong. But silence also corrodes. He stood, pacing once. "Your father will face an inquiry. There'll be hearings, maybe press leaks. He's not young. This will break what's left of his reputation. You should prepare for that." I swallowed hard. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted him to stop humiliating me. "I know," Becker said. "Intent doesn't erase consequence." He stopped at the door, then turned. "Your grandfather tried to redeem himself through exposure. You might have just finished what he started." When he left, the room felt even smaller. I finally drank the water. It tasted like old metal and guilt. They let me go at dawn. Outside, the hotel looked stripped of its glamour. Cigarette butts on marble, flags hanging limp. I walked past the empty parking lot where last night's laughter had turned to static. Somewhere behind a closed door, my father was being debriefed, his every word weighed against the ghosts of a war no one admitted had existed. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to pity for him. Because humiliation can be cleaned off a reputation, but legacy, once cracked, keeps bleeding. I got in my car, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out the notebook. There was a line I'd never noticed before, scrawled faintly beneath the last page of notation, almost erased by time. "Truth will always find the loudest son." My hands shook. I closed the cover, the leather warm from the dawn light. Somewhere inside the hotel, a door slammed, sharp, metallic, final. And for a moment, I wasn't sure who that sound condemned, my father or me. It took less than 48 hours for the first headline to appear. Someone inside the investigation had leaked it. They always do. And by Monday morning, every major outlet had the same phrase splashed across their front page. The Forbidden Hymn. Veteran Gala sparks reopening of classified operations. No names at first, just the suggestion of scandal. By noon, the blur turned to clarity. Colonel Richard Hale, retired, under review for alleged involvement in unreported field operations, 1973 to 74. And below that, smaller print. Song performed by his son during Veterans Event may contain encoded coordinates linked to Operation Sable. I read it on my phone, standing in the kitchen, coffee turning cold. Every word felt like a nail. I didn't go to work that day. The school called twice, polite concern turning into bureaucratic tone, and I lied, said I was sick. In a way, I was. Sick from seeing my name half-mentioned in comment sections. Sick from hearing radio hosts speculate about the musician who exposed a cover-up. They didn't know me. They didn't know that I hadn't wanted exposure, just acknowledgement. But the world doesn't care about intentions. It only needs a narrative. And the son who sang the truth sold better than the man who didn't know what he was doing. By evening, the phone calls started. Journalists, former students, old friends pretending to check in. Each conversation ended the same way, with silence when they realized I wasn't proud of what happened. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. A pause, then a voice I'd know anywhere. Michael. He sounded older, or maybe it was just the lack of authority in his tone. They've taken my statements, he said. They'll take more tomorrow. I don't expect a fair hearing. I gripped the phone tighter. Did you do it, Dad? Did you order those operations? He didn't answer immediately. I heard him exhale, slow, deliberate. When you're in command, truth is rationed. You don't get to choose purity, only priorities. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's the only one I have. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked, almost softly, why did you play that song? I could have told him about the years of ridicule, the quiet dinners, the way he always introduced me as an accessory to his reputation. But all I said was, because you told me to. He gave a short, dry laugh. I suppose I did. Then, lower. You sound like your grandfather. And just like that, the line went dead. The next day, photos surfaced, grainy images of my father leaving Henderson Hall under escort. His head was high, but his eyes looked hollow, like a man walking through smoke. Commentators debated whether he'd be charged or quietly retired into obscurity. By Thursday, the government released a short statement acknowledging irregularities in historical field documentation, which, in bureaucratic language, means, yes, something happened. Please stop asking. But people didn't stop. The story spread beyond the military circle, forums, documentaries, podcasts. Some treated me like a hero. Others called me a traitor's son. Both versions felt wrong. I spent nights replaying that evening in my mind. The notes, the faces, the exact second when Becker stood up. Every detail became a loop. Sometimes I imagined staying seated, refusing the microphone. Sometimes I imagined smashing the guitar before it could sing. But you can't rewind guilt. You can only learn its tempo. A week later, I received an unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typewritten. Thomas Hale, deceased 1979, clearance restored posthumously. Actions deemed consistent with conscience. For the record, he was right. Below the text, a faint signature. A. Becker. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before folding it carefully back into the envelope. For the first time in years, I cried. Not for my father, not even for my grandfather, but for the version of myself that believed truth could ever come cleanly. That night, I turned on the TV just in time to see footage from the Veterans Press Conference. They had replaced my father's portrait on the memorial wall with a plaque that read status, under review. The applause was polite, controlled, forgetful. I switched off the screen. The room went dark except for the faint glow of my grandfather's notebook on the table. I opened it again, staring at the burned edges of the page. Night draws no borders on a map you carry home. I hummed it under my breath, slower this time, stripped of code and memory, just melody, fragile and human. For the first time, it sounded like a song again. For a week, the world couldn't get enough of me. Then it decided it had. The first wave of attention, the interviews, the praise, the think pieces, all vanished the moment another scandal surfaced. That's how modern outrage works. It travels fast, then forgets. But what lingers are the fragments. The people who still recognize your face when you buy bread, the whispers that follow your last name. By the second week, Hale meant something else entirely. It wasn't honor anymore. It wasn't even soldier. It was a headline, a controversy, a family torn open on live television. Mom called every evening at first. She'd moved south years ago after their divorce, and we hadn't spoken much since. When she finally reached me, her voice trembled between pride and grief. "Michael, whatever happens, you did the right thing," she said. "He needed to be stopped." I didn't know how to tell her that I hadn't been trying to stop anyone, that I'd just been trying to survive a dinner. Later she admitted she'd known pieces of the story. "Your grandfather told me before he died," she whispered. But I thought it was dementia talking. "He said there were people still buried out there, people who deserved names." Her voice cracked. "He wanted your father to come clean. I think that's why they never spoke again." The idea of those two men, one building silence, the other trying to break it, haunted me. And I was somewhere in the middle, carrying the echo. By the end of the month, my father's hearing was postponed indefinitely. "Pending review of national interest," the official letter said, which meant he's too connected to punish publicly, but too guilty to absolve. He was neither free nor condemned, a ghost of his own making. He didn't call again. Instead, I heard from one of his old officers. A polite email, brief and signed. "Your father saved men who didn't deserve saving and buried men who did. Don't judge what you can't imagine." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. There's a peculiar cruelty in half-truths. They make you both angry and curious. Meanwhile, the online world turned. Some called for medals. Others called for prison. Hashtags, podcasts, endless debates about whistleblowing versus betrayal. A journalist even asked if I'd be willing to record the anthem in a studio for a documentary. I said no. Some things shouldn't have a soundtrack. When I walked to work again, finally, a few students clapped as I entered. Someone had left a note on my desk. "Your courage gave us truth." It should have felt good. Instead, it felt like theft, like someone had stolen my shame and branded it as heroism. Nights were the worst. Sleep brought back the gala in fragments, the spotlight, the faces, the single phrase that changed everything. That's the forbidden anthem of Ghost Team 7. Sometimes, I'd wake up before the line, still hearing the breath before Becker spoke, that 1 second of ignorance that I now missed more than anything. One evening, I dreamt I was 17 again, playing the melody in my room. The door opened, and my father stood there, younger, sharper, his medals newer. He didn't yell. He just said, "You have no idea what you're tuning into." Then he walked away, leaving the door open and the world leaking in. When I woke up, it was raining. The kind of steady, disciplined rain that sounds like marching feet. I made coffee, turned on the radio. They were talking about the Hale inquiry again. Old soldiers giving opinions, pundits guessing verdicts. No one asking what it felt like to be the sun in the middle of all that noise. At noon, a letter arrived, hand-delivered. The handwriting was familiar. Inside, 2 lines, no signature. "You were right to sing. But songs have echoes." It wasn't my father's handwriting. It wasn't Becker's either. Maybe it was from one of the men who served under Ghost Team 7. Maybe it was from someone who lost everything because of them. I didn't know which possibility frightened me more. That night, I took the guitar from its case. I sat in the dark, fingers hovering above the strings. For a long time, I didn't play. Then, slowly, I found a different rhythm. No codes, no coordinates, no ghosts. Just 7 notes reshaped into something human. Not Ghost Team 7, but Sun Number 1. And for a few seconds, the world was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet, and that was enough. 3 weeks after the gala, a letter arrived from the military tribunal. Not for me, for next of kin. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity, or maybe unfinished grief, made me tear it gently along the edge. Colonel Richard Hale has been transferred to St. Andrew's Military Hospital, under restricted observation. Visitors limited to immediate family only. There was no word like sentence or trial. Just bureaucracy's cold rhythm. Transfer, observation, limited. Still, the invitation was clear enough. He wanted to see me. The hospital was outside the city, an old converted fortress turned into a care facility for retired officers. White walls, no windows that opened. A place where silence had rank. At the reception, the nurse glanced at the paper, then at me. "Room 214, she said softly, as if lowering her voice could soften what waited there. I found him sitting by the window, though the glass was thick and the sea view outside looked almost painted, blue, still, unreachable. He wasn't in uniform anymore. Just a gray sweater, a wristband, and a face that seemed smaller than I remembered. For the first time, he looked like someone's father, not a colonel, not a legend. Just a man reduced to pulse and regret. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think you'd ask." He nodded, as if that made sense. There was a long silence before he said, "They're still deciding what to do with me. Becker visits sometimes. He's fair, too fair maybe." He looked at his hands. "They want me to sign a statement, admitting the hymn existed, but denying its intent. You understand what that means." "It means they'll bury the truth again," I said. He gave a small laugh. "Exactly. And that's what the Army does best." I sat across from him, the chair creaking under the weight of everything we'd never said. Finally, he asked, "Do you hate me?" The question hit harder than any accusation. I looked at him, the lines, the medals now reduced to memories, and realized I didn't have a simple answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I hate what you did. I hate how you used me. But hate, it's a full-time job, and I'm tired." He nodded, eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. I deserve that. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint rhythm of rain tapping the window. He reached for something on the bedside table, a folded page, creased from too much handling. "Your grandfather wrote this," he said. "I found it years ago, but I didn't destroy it. I couldn't." He handed it to me. It was a fragment, the same handwriting as in the notebook, shaky but firm in conviction. "If ever the truth finds you through music, don't silence it, even if it ruins what we built." I stared at the page. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" He sighed. "Because I believed silence was mercy. For him, for me, for you. I thought I was protecting the family. But maybe I was protecting my own myth." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the man who humiliated me in front of generals, but the one who'd been carrying ghosts longer than I'd been alive. For the first time, pity replaced anger. He whispered, "When you sang that night, for a second, I thought I heard him. My father. Not the medic, not the traitor they called him. Just the man. I realized I'd spent my life trying to outshout his guilt." He paused. "You finally made him louder than me." His eyes glistened. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest he'd ever come. "I wanted you to have control, Michael," he said softly. "And I taught you humiliation instead. I'm sorry." The words landed quietly, but left an echo. For once, I didn't need to win. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. "Rest," I said. "Let them decide what they want. History will do the rest." As I stood to leave, he called after me. "Michael, play something next time you come. Something that isn't about us." I smiled. "I'll try." When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still carried that metallic scent of endings. I looked at the sea through the fogged glass. Somewhere out there were the coordinates of his sins, encoded in a melody I could never unhear. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. Just human. 3 months later, they asked me to play again. Not at a gala this time, at a memorial. The Veterans Council wanted to honor all who served with integrity. A sanitized phrase, built to offend no one and mean everything. Still, Becker called me personally. "You don't have to," he said, "but it might help close the circle." I hesitated for days. The thought of standing on another stage made my chest tighten. But something inside me, maybe my grandfather's ghost, maybe just unfinished music, told me to go. The hall was different this time. Smaller. No chandeliers, no champagne. Just rows of chairs, a single microphone, a flag folded on a stand. The crowd was quiet, veterans, families, a few students from my school. Becker sat in the front row, unreadable as always. There was an empty chair beside him, marked, reserved, Colonel R. Hale. But I knew my father wouldn't come. St. Andrews wasn't a prison, but it might as well have been. When they called my name, I walked to the microphone. No one clapped. They didn't need to. I spoke first, not rehearsed, just real. My father used to say that songs belong to the people who understand them. I spent years misunderstanding everything he stood for. But tonight, I'm not here to expose anything. I'm here to give back what was stolen from silence. Then I sat on the stool and opened the guitar case. Same instrument, different hands. I began to play. Not the forbidden hymn, not exactly. I had taken its bones and rebuilt them. 7 beats, then 8, but softened, like time healing an old wound, leaving the scar visible but painless. It wasn't a march anymore. It was a requiem and a lullaby. As I played, I saw faces in the crowd lowering their heads, not in shame, but in recognition. Even Becker's posture shifted, his hands clasped together, eyes distant. When I reached the refrain, I changed the final chord, resolving what the original left open. A single, clean major, fragile, hopeful, defiant. The note hung in the air, then faded. No applause followed. Just silence, the good kind. The kind that feels earned. Afterward, Becker approached me. "You rewrote it," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. "It wasn't supposed to be a weapon." He nodded. "Your father heard it." I blinked. "What?" He smiled faintly. "We streamed it live. He requested it, actually. He handed me a sealed envelope. He wanted you to have this." I opened it later that night, back in my apartment. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded. 3 men in uniforms. One of them my grandfather, standing beside a younger version of my father. On the back, a short note in my father's handwriting. "You were right. Music outlives command. Make it count." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. Not confession, just acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough. Weeks passed. The story left the news cycle entirely. People forgot the scandal, moved on to the next outrage. But sometimes, someone from the audience would find me online, writing. I was there. I heard peace in that song. I never replied. I didn't need to. One afternoon, I visited St. Andrew's. His room was empty, neatly folded blankets, no flowers, no note. The nurse said he'd passed quietly in his sleep. He'd been listening to music when it happened. She handed me a small MP3 player. There was only one file on it, the recording of my performance. I listened there in the hallway, earbuds trembling slightly in my hands. When the final chord rang out, I swear I heard another sound beneath it. A whisper, almost a hum, in his voice. "Good job, son." Maybe it was just feedback. Maybe not. That night, I performed one last time at my classroom piano, empty school, just me and the dark. I played the hymn again, the new version, and whispered, "Night draws no borders on a map you carry home." For the first time, it felt true. I wasn't haunted anymore, just inherited. The letter from the ministry came 2 months after my father's death. It was thin, official paper, government seal, typewritten lines that didn't carry emotion. Inside was a brief statement confirming posthumous administrative closure. But at the bottom, in handwriting that wasn't bureaucratic, there was a note. "Personal effects released to next of kin. Locker 12B, St. Andrew's Archive." No condolences. No explanation. Just a direction. The archive room was in the hospital's basement, quiet, cold, and full of dust that smelled like memories trying to stay intact. The clerk led me down a narrow corridor, unlocked a metal cabinet, and pulled out a small wooden box. It was lighter than I expected. Inside, there were only 3 things. His service medal, dulled by time. A folded piece of sheet music, my arrangement of the hymn. A key wrapped in a faded photograph. The photograph showed my father and grandfather standing outside a hangar. Both smiling, not posing. A rare candid shot where they looked like real people, not monuments. On the back, written in pencil, "Studio, Locker 7. Keep it safe, keep it honest." I turned the key over in my hand. It wasn't from the hospital. The engraving read, "Henderson Hall." The hall had been closed since the scandal. But I still had a contact there, one of the event technicians who'd helped me that night. He let me in through a side door, nervous but curious. "Just 10 minutes, he said. "If anyone asks, I didn't see you." The air inside was stale, carrying the faint echo of laughter and applause long since gone. The stage looked smaller, stripped of lights and glory. Locker 7 was behind the side curtain, part of the old storage room for sound equipment. The key fit perfectly. Inside were reels of magnetic tape, labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Field Hymn Variations, 1973 to 74. And beneath them, a single cassette labeled, "For Richard." I found an old player in a corner, plugged it into the wall, and pressed play. At first, just static. Then a voice, low, weary, familiar. My grandfather's. "If you're hearing this, it means the war followed us home. We thought we were burying secrets. Instead, we planted them. Richard, You were my best student and my worst mistake. If you want to save what's left of us, teach your son the melody. But let him decide what it means. I froze. It wasn't just a confession. It was a transfer of burden, one generation to the next. And my father had done exactly that. He hadn't forbidden me to play the hymn because he wanted it erased. He'd forbidden me because he knew I'd eventually rewrite it. He'd turned guilt into inheritance and music into confession. I sat there for a long time, listening to the tape until it dissolved into static again. When it ended, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a strange calm, like closing a book that's finally run out of pages. I took one of the reels and left the rest behind. On the way out, I looked once more at the empty stage. In my mind, I could still see the spotlight, the crowd, my father's face at the moment truth cracked through ceremony. He hadn't wanted to destroy me that night. He'd wanted me to finish what he couldn't. It was the only way he knew to tell the truth, through humiliation. A lesson disguised as cruelty. I smiled faintly. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did, but understanding why they couldn't do better. Outside, the sun was setting over the sea. For once, Henderson Hall didn't look haunted. It looked human. I tossed the key into the water, watched the ripples fade, and whispered the same line my grandfather wrote decades ago. Keep it safe, keep it honest. For the first time in my life, I felt both. It's been almost a year now. A year since that night under the chandeliers, since the chord that changed everything. I still teach music, though my students see me differently now. Not as the quiet teacher, but as the man from that story. They whisper when they think I can't hear. That's him, the guy who sang the forbidden song. I don't correct them. Let them have their myth. The truth, as I've learned, is rarely as clean or dramatic as the legend that grows around it. The government inquiry ended quietly, just as Becker predicted. No arrests, no trials. Just sealed records and redacted summaries that said a lot by saying nothing. But something did change, not in the news, not in the reports, but in people. A handful of veterans came forward, sharing fragments of memory, old coordinates, half-buried names. Families received letters. Not all of them were kind, but they were honest. And for the first time, those old ghosts had somewhere to rest. Becker retired soon after. He sent me one last message, a single sentence. The hymn is yours now. Make sure it stays human. I didn't reply, but I understood. He was handing me the silence that follows truth, the space where healing begins. Every Sunday morning, I play at a small coastal cafe. Nothing grand, just locals and the smell of coffee and sea salt. The first time I performed there, I almost stopped halfway through the set. Not because I was nervous, but because a man at the back, in a weathered uniform jacket, started humming along. Not the forbidden melody, the new one. Mine. After the set, he came up and said, "My brother served under Ghost Team 7. I recognized the rhythm, but it doesn't hurt anymore." I nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty. Because maybe that's all truth is supposed to do, not fix the past, but stop it from festering. Sometimes, I visit St. Andrew's. His grave is simple. No titles, no ranks. Just Richard Hale, 1948 to 2025. He taught the truth to sing. I don't know who chose the inscription. Maybe Becker. Maybe the nurse. Maybe the world itself, trying to find poetry in damage. I sit there, play a few quiet bars on my guitar, and let the sound fade into the sea wind. Every time, I end with the same chord, the one that finally resolves. The one that used to be missing. It feels like closure, even if closure is just another word for surrender. My grandfather's tapes are in my apartment now, stacked neatly in a box labeled Field Hymn Archive. I haven't listened to all of them. Maybe I never will. Not because I'm afraid of what's inside, but because sometimes silence is the only respectful answer to history. Still, when I touch those reels, I think about the three of us. Thomas, Richard, and me. 3 men bound not by blood, but by the same melody that tried to consume us. And I think about how every generation gets to rewrite the song it inherits. Mine isn't about war. It's about aftermath. About forgiveness that doesn't erase the wound, but lets it scar honestly. I'm recording an album now. Not for release, just for me. The title is simple, Ghost Team Requiem. Each track begins with fragments of the original rhythm, then dissolves into something gentler, something alive. The last piece is called Transmission. It ends with my father's voice, a recording from the hospital, when he'd left me that final message. Play something that isn't about us. And I did. But no matter what I write, no matter what key I choose, there's always a trace of the old pattern. 7 beats, then 8, then pause. Like memory breathing. Maybe that's how legacy works. Not as a burden, but as a rhythm that keeps you honest. If you're reading this, or listening, or remembering, take it from me. Our parents' silence doesn't have to become our own. Sometimes, the only way to heal a lie is to sing it differently. And if the world tells you your voice doesn't belong in the room, sing anyway. Because truth has perfect pitch. It just needs someone brave enough to carry the note. I wrote all this not for pity, but for record. For anyone who's ever been handed a broken story and told to guard it. You don't have to. You can transform it. My father's legacy ended in silence. Mine began in the same place. And that's how I learned. Silence isn't the absence of music. It's the moment before you decide what kind of song to write next. So write yours. Play it loud, play it honest. And if it echoes, let it. Because sometimes, the echo is the healing.